Alright, so this might sound basic, but it is so important, and most hiring managers in biotech get it wrong. Chances are the way you're reviewing CVs when you're recruiting is costing you some really exceptional talent. Not only are you likely screening out people who could do a really solid job for you, you're almost certainly missing out on those who could bring something different, something impactful, and something that moves the needle for your team. There are two fundamental mistakes that we see regularly and you're likely making. Number one, you're probably setting the bar too high. And number two, there's a strong chance you're putting far too much stock in things like layout and formatting. Let's start with the first one. Too many hiring managers are setting unreasonable standards when reviewing CVs and are trying to determine whether someone's the ideal candidate for their position from a narrow, limited view of their experience. Your focus at the CV review stage of the process shouldn't be to try and predict a hiring decision, but really just to determine whether someone's worth talking to. And how do you know if they're worth talking to? Well, that bit's quite simple. If they meet the basic fundamental criteria required to do the job, well, then you should speak with them. The reality is that some people are just better at writing CVs than others. Some people have skills, experience, and characteristics that they hugely underestimate the value of and therefore don't include in their resume. Some people find it really difficult to sell themselves. None of those things makes them any worse or less suitable for the job. Have you ever interviewed a candidate who, on paper, you weren't really sure about, but then when you met them, you were blown away? Or maybe you've seen a job advertised that you just knew you'd be great at, but you were rejected before any interview took place based on a small detail in your CV. Most of us have, and there's just no way to tell how strong a candidate is until you've at least spoken with them. Now, obviously you can't speak to everyone who applies to the job, so setting appropriate criteria is crucial. As I've said, at the CV review stage, these should be the absolute minimum requirements. Any more than this, and you're ensuring that you'll rule out some people who could be absolutely great. It should go without saying that as your hiring process advances, you'll of course raise the bar of what you're looking for. But at this very early juncture, keep an open mind. One other key recommendation to bear in mind, don't try to compare candidates to each other at this point. You are working with limited and imperfect information, as we've already talked about. And if you start mentally ranking people this early on, then it can be really hard to shift those judgments as your interviews progress. Try and judge each application on their own merits and speak to everybody who fits the bill. Look, at the same time as all of that, I'm not unrealistic on this point. Maybe you have an influx of highly qualified applicants and at your first pass, you're left with 15 or 20 people who meet your minimum criteria. Should you interview all of them? Well, firstly, be aware that this is a good problem to have. And then feel free to raise the bar a little, but in a thoughtful way. Beyond the most basic criteria that you've already used, what's the next most important factor in someone's ability to do the job? Apply that as a filter, and you should then get down to a manageable list. If not, repeat this step. Just be sure not to make arbitrary selection decisions. The second key error I see at CV review, as mentioned, is placing far too much emphasis on things like layout, formatting, and other details that really aren't material to the role in question. Now, look, naturally, if you're hiring a graphic designer, then these things are crucial indicators of competence, but for most positions, that's not the case. Would you rather hire a research scientist with great technical skills in the lab who sends you a somewhat uninspiring looking resume? Or would you rather hire one whose presentation is outstanding but is below average at the bench? Whether you like the look of a CV isn't really relevant. The content of the CV and the experience of the candidate are. Try to look past the font and the fact there's a picture of the candidate at the top of the document. If they're qualified, speak with them. We are all busy, and yes, it takes time to review CVs properly, conduct screening interviews, and push back on your initial gut reactions. The key question to ask yourself is this: would you rather take an extra couple of hours now for the chance of hiring someone outstanding that contributes someone to your company for decades? Or would you rather rush this step and bring in a new team member who's just okay?